Hi guys, Northern Ireland's own version of Tommy Robinson, a guy called Jim Allister, has jumped on board the latest bandwagon, that of course, the Asylum hotels. Now, Jim is the head of the TUV, which is a small extremist party in Northern Ireland to the right of the DUP, which is to the right of sanity. Now, Jim was interviewed on the BBC about the Asylum hotels and what he would do about the whole situation. Now, Jim wants to just deport people without even processing their claims. Have a listen to this.
What do you make of that? The numbers are moving in the right way. The numbers are dropping. The numbers in hotels and off hotels are coming down. And your reaction's been disproportionate and over the top.
I reject that. It's not, first and foremost, the numbers. It's the fact that hotels are being used to accommodate these illegal migrants into the United Kingdom.
Well, they're not illegal if their claim hasn't been processed.
Sorry, the presumption is that it is an illegal migrant.
No, there isn't a presumption that somebody is an illegal migrant. The presumption is that they are putting in an asylum claim. Now, if somebody doesn't put in an asylum claim and then absconds, then they are technically an illegal migrant. The term illegal is not correct. It should be undocumented because they haven't broken the law. They're not being registered. Now, it's not illegal to cross the channel and put in a claim for asylum. It's not breaking any law. You may not like it, but that doesn't make it illegal.
Who is then seeking to legitimize their position and to obtain legal status. Now, the context of this is that I have hundreds of constituents, others have hundreds of constituents on housing waiting lists. They don't get hotels. They don't get free meals. They're put at the end of a list. And the end of a list, some of the language done for years. Okay,
but people generally don't want to stay in ex-hotels. Remember, these are not hotels. Now, there's also an important factor to include here. 5%, about 5% of all immigration is the small boats, is the asylum seekers. 5%, not... people may think it's like 60% or 80%. No, it's a very small minority that are claiming asylum, but it's of course being amplified by the media and the likes of Reform and TUV. But remember, 5% of immigration is small boats, is asylum seekers. But in Northern Ireland, where Jim Allister is, it's 2.5% of that 5%. So when Jim Allister is talking about hotels full of asylum seekers, do you know how many asylum seekers there are in hotels in Northern Ireland? 288, according to data from the Home Office from March this year. 288 people. Now, there are 2,200 people in total, and these are in private dwellings, they're in HMOs, they're in other forms of accommodation. And 92 people are in temporary accommodation. But when it comes to housing, these are separate issues. Why are you trying to combine the two? People who want to have a house don't want to stay in a hotel. Because, first of all, the asylum seekers are not staying in hotels. They're staying in ex-hotels. These are converted buildings. They're not, as we keep saying, they're not hotels. So homeless people, I believe, should be put up in hotels until a home is provided for them. But they're not being put up in hotels. And asylum seekers are not being put up in hotels.
For housing. So when adopting an attitude that anyone who arrives, howsoever they arrive, into the United Kingdom illegally is immediately deported. Now that, of course, legally would require us to significantly adjust our approach. We would have to disavow aspects of the European Convention on Human Rights.
Okay. So it's just deny British people their rights. Of course, the caveat here is they're trying to sell it as we're denying foreign illegals their rights, but it's about denying British people their rights. That's the goal at the end of the day. This guy used to be a member of the DUP. He was against the Good Friday Agreement. He's happy to use the Good Friday Agreement as a cudgel against the Northern Ireland Protocol and the Windsor Framework, which he's of course against. But now he's suggesting that that the Good Friday Agreement be torn up, basically, because if the UK leaves the Convention on Human Rights, the European Convention, then it would undermine the Good Friday Agreement, which Jim Allister doesn't give a frig about it anyway.
Ireland in particular, we'd have to disavow the wretched Article 2 of the protocol, which, of course, as we saw in the Rwanda case, prevents us from following GB legislation on these issues.
Yes, why was that the case? Because it meant that human rights would be different in Northern Ireland than in the rest of the UK. There'd be fewer protections in GB than there would be in Northern Ireland. And Jim Allister is against that. He wants fewer rights for everyone, not just elevating rights for everyone in the UK, but he wants to diminish rights in Northern Ireland to match GB.
And we have to disavow the very much out-of-date Refugee Convention of 1951. So,
see, the whole problem with all of this is that there are countries in Europe which are part of the European Convention on Human Rights, who are deporting people. Like, the right wing and people like Jim Allister keep coming up back with this, well, we can't really deport anyone because of the ECHR. Yes, but so we need to leave the ECHR to start deporting people. But there are countries who are part of the ECHR who are deporting people. So that completely destroys your argument.
Fundamental changes need to be made, but it's a question of national sovereignty.
Okay.
And a national government should be taking control and should be building.
Were to move these people out of the hotels, where would you move them to? What's your thought on this? What?
Remember, there are 288 people in hotels in Northern Ireland. Not thousands of people, 288 people. They could probably all fit in one hotel, but probably the hotels in Northern Ireland are quite small, so there are a number of hotels in use.
What would your plan be? Trevor Clark was talking about moving them to disused army barracks in England. What would you do?
Much more radical. When they arrive here illegally, we should change the law so that we could deport them immediately.
No, but I'm talking about the people. No, sorry.
This is the problem with these right-wingers, is you ask them, okay, what do you do with the people who are here? Well, what we would do is as soon as they arrive, we would deport them. No, but we're talking about the people who are already in the country. We're talking about people who are already on British soil. What do you do with those people? Not we're going to start deporting people. Of course, the argument of deporting people as soon as they arrive doesn't make any sense either, because where do you deport them to? You deport somebody who hasn't a legitimate claim. Jim Allister has talked about how Christians in Muslim countries are oppressed. So I presume he would also include deporting those people back to those Muslim countries. I would love to ask Jim Allister, would you support deporting Christians that you have claimed to stand up for back to Muslim countries where they're being oppressed, in your opinion? Because you'd be automatically deporting people. You wouldn't be processing their claim. They would arrive, they would say, hey, I'm a Christian from a Muslim country and I'm being oppressed. Can I put in an asylum claim? And if Jim Allister was in charge, he'd say, no, because we're going to deport you back to those Muslim countries straight away. We're not even going to consider your case. That's what he's promoting here. This is exactly the sort of things that the right wing in GB are promoting as well.
I'm talking about the people who are currently in the hotels in Northern Ireland.
Something else that we could do that's done in England. There's a right to rent check in England. It isn't here. And the right to rent check in England in the private sector means you can't rent unless you can show that you're legally in the country.
The question was, there are people in hotels, very few hotels in Northern Ireland, but people are in hotels. What are you going to do about those people if you're going to close the hotels? And now he's talking about rent. You
can rent here in the private sector, and the previous contributor talked about the housing executives. She didn't mention the housing sector, the private housing sector, and that's where most of them are being housed in HMOs, etc. We should have the same provision as they have in England, that you cannot rent in the private sector unless you are here legally.
Okay.
And if we had that, that would be a further deterrent.
We're talking about people who are already in the country, not a deterrent for people who are considering moving there. Is this guy dense? Is this the Lee Anderson of Northern Ireland? Does he not understand simple logical situations. He's been asked a question, people who are currently in hotels, where would you move them to? And he started talking about rented accommodation and how, well, you can only put people in rented accommodation if they're here legally. He said, well, we're talking about people who are putting in an asylum claim, who've had an asylum claim, began its process. You can't deport people unless their claim has been processed. Now, he doesn't seem to support the idea as before in processing claims. This guy is an elected official. He's a member of parliament. And he doesn't understand simple concepts like asylum seeker, economic migrant, the rule of law, rented accommodation, hotels. He doesn't understand these simple concepts. And he's earning, was it, £94,000-97,000 a year as an MP, and the expenses that go along with it. I hope that the people of his constituency are watching this and will reconsider voting for him at the next election. Because what good does Jim Allister actually do? He's ranting and raving about rent, about asylum seekers, illegal migrants, boats, hotels, all of this stuff, and he doesn't seem to grasp the basics. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think, and I'll see you in the next video.